Welcome. Hi,
Hi,
everybody.
everyone.
Yeah, this is Margaret and Rosie. We're on the channel today to talk about this book, this brightly colored Food of a Younger Land by Mark Kurlansky. Obviously a legend in his own time because he's done all these fantastic nonfiction books. Basically, usually on like a one thing that he just sort of ranges around history to talk about the one thing. I've read Cod, and I know there's salt, and I'm sure there's all these other
And
interesting.
there's one about oysters in New York, which sounds like it must be so niche that you could not possibly write a whole book about it, but actually it's fascinating.
Yes. And in editing the description of this video, I think I put in an oyster at the end. So there you go. That's why that's there.
Nice.
But Rosie, this is your first time on my channel, I believe. So why don't you say hi and introduce us to your channel? I'll put it in the chat.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. As Margaret said, I'm Rosie Cockshutt. I also make BookTube videos, probably not surprising to you. I read a bit of everything. The byline that I'm going with these days is that my reading is like the weather. If you don't like it, wait 15 minutes and you'll have something different. But I read a lot of fiction across like everything from classics, which I'm just starting to get into, fantasy, literary fiction, everything, and a whole bunch of nonfiction. So, you know, if you like a little bit of everything or want to maybe discover something new, come on over and check out my channel.
I like it. Yeah. I feel like a lot of people don't read a lot of nonfiction, so there's only a few names.
It's true.
Who I know at least. That
it feels really weird sometimes to be like, people like, oh, you read a lot of nonfiction, and then I look at my own stats and I'm like, I only read maybe a third of my reading is nonfiction.
Oh, okay.
So I'm always trying to read more though. That's like
yeah. I didn't do a pie chart, so I don't have that image immediately recallable, but I do read a fair amount of nonfiction. Yeah, I guess they do. I just didn't look it up.
That's totally fair.
Really.
I love data visualization.
Yeah. Yes. I'm currently reading 5 points, but I'm going to get distracted. So, okay, let me stay on topic. Let's introduce our subject. If anyone does not know, Food of a Younger Land, the title refers to a project earlier in America's history where during the Depression, the government set up a Bureau of Federal Works called the Federal Works Project. And one of the things, many people maybe know it for the Civilian Conservation Corps, which put up a lot of bridges and did work on forestry lands. But they also had the, did I get this wrong with the abbreviations? Works Progress Administration maybe was the umbrella, and then Federal Writers Project was underneath that. Okay, so
that sounds right, because I keep wanting to call it the Writers Project Administration, but that's not right.
No, yeah, Works Progress. So the writers part of that, they originally did guidebooks. The first thing I found out in his introduction, they originally wrote guidebooks for places so they could employ lots of local writers to talk about their regions, hometowns, whatever. And then they were like, okay, that was a great success. Now what do we do? What do people want to know about? So they sent out people to find out about food. And this is in 30s and 40s mainly. So what popped out at you in terms of most interesting food fact that you read?
Okay, this one actually, I was just looking at my notes, so it's right at the top of my head. One of the early entries says that a popcorn kernel expands by 18 times when you pop it. And I was just like, look, I make a lot of air popped popcorn. That does not seem correct. But also, I have not yet gotten around to counting out like a measure of like a cup of popcorn, like maybe actually comparing. Times. But maybe they had better popcorn back in the day.
Yeah. Carrie's here. She's letting me know. Yes, WPA is right. And knows nothing about the book, but here for 2 of my favorite BookTubers. Thank you. Yeah. Food facts.
She can let us know about some of the southern stuff if it's that section was interesting, and I'd be curious to know how much of that is
true.
Still,
she does not know about the book, so we're gonna have to go in if we want to.
Yes.
Let's see. It's popping it open here. I've got Florida hush puppies, Kentucky spoon bread, and Mississippi molasses pie. Okay, so one of the interesting things about this book was the structure of it. So he explains this in the introduction, but okay, this is one of the things I didn't like about it. So I know in your wrap up you said that you really liked this and it was fantastic, but I really liked it, and then I started like losing my enthusiasm for it as I went through it, just because it was so all over the place, right? So some things are just plain recipes, some things are his notes about the writers themselves, some things are the written reports that were, found sort of in the desk in a jumble, and those vary so widely. So yeah. What do you think?
I think it was definitely hit and miss. I can hear my partner coming down the stairs, so if he walks in the background, I'm sorry.
Second appearance.
But, yes. I think definitely there were certain entries that were just like not as good. Some of them I found like either just flat out incredibly informative and interesting, or I don't know if they were meant to be hilarious, but they kind of were.
Oh dear. Okay.
But certainly some of them were just kind of like, this is just such undiluted racism that it's not interesting in anything other than a historical like studies context.
Right.
Or just like you said, kind of like, this is just a recipe. This is a random recipe written by someone who doesn't know how to write recipes.
Right.
So
I sort of wondered at his author choice of like embracing some and digging a little, and then just sort of letting other ones just sit there. So this is a little like, okay, I take it as you.
I think it could have benefited from a lot more commentary. Yeah. I think you could have cut some of the less interesting entries, and obviously that's, I guess, more work for him, not to imply that he's lazy, and just beefed up the modern introductions commentary side of it.
Right, yeah. Like one of the ones that stuck out to me was the foot washing of whatever. And so the story is about I think a Midwest or Southern. It was towards the 3/4 through the book. The story was about people who are gathered for a big meal, and they've done all this work, and the food's going to be so good because this one grandma is super good at this certain type of food, and everyone's waiting for like the gun to go off, for like the call basically to go off for everyone to sit down. And that happens, and one guy rushes to the table, and the grandma that's like the well-known one's like, nope, everyone but you, like good morning to everyone but you. And it's, I think, her son-in-law. And you don't find out until like a page later that it's because he washed his feet in the batter that his wife was making. And I was like, okay, fair on grandma for calling it out, but what the fuck? Like,
how did this not make more of an impression on me?
Yeah.
I mean, I get the anger because my father once accidentally washed his hands into the sitting fat for the Thanksgiving gravy. It was, separating in the sink, and he washed his hands. Thankfully, it was only a third of the turkey drainings.
Oh my god!
But I get the anger. But how did that not make more of an impression? Wow!
And why would you do that? I mean, obviously that's
batter. What?
Yeah, for her bread, and she was described as this sort of mousy type of woman, and sort of like a not downtrodden, something. Beaten spirit, basically. And the next week he made it up to her because they were going to have another one of these digs, and then he was able to come to the table, but not that time. And it was like, this is an interesting family culture that I don't know that I would want to drop in on, even as a writer.
Fair.
Yeah. Okay. So here's one of my sort of opening questions: is the work as a whole. How was it reading it from Canada? From across the border? Have you any equivalent type of text to talk about Canadian folk traditions and food, or government stuff that crosses that?
I've never read anything like this from a Canadian context, and I'm really interested to. As a labor economist in Canada, I should really know about this stuff, but I don't think Canada had nearly the same level of response to the Depression. From what I understand, obviously it was bad up here, but because I don't think we were as affected by the climate side stuff. Again, I might be wildly wrong, and like come at me in the comments if I am. But I can't think of anything on this scale or of this type, but I think it would be really interesting because we definitely had regional food, and it's definitely something that we've lost, that is really rare and not well known now. But yeah, I don't know of any documents about that, and if they exist, I would love to get into them, because even as someone not from the US, I found the history side of this fascinating. And a lot of the interesting stuff is the fact that it was written in the 1930s, but like never polished up and preserved and then presented to us.
Yeah.
There were moments where it's someone in the 1930s writing about 50 years ago as, the ye old good old days. And that was a really interesting perspective to see the historical perspective on history. So
yeah.
No, I still really enjoyed it. I thought it was cool.
Cool. One of the other things that hit me was this, exactly what you're talking about, the historical eye for us from a period that for us is historical itself. So when I think of food in the 30s, I think about things that are right before all the mechanization and McDonaldization that is happening. And so I feel like if people were seeing that coming, maybe in the 40s, it was sort of a romantic look back, kind of like when, what's the other thing that I always think of? Oh, so in the 19th century, like turn of the 20th century, when Native Americans had been hunted, preyed upon, killed, herded into reservations. Oh, the noble savage ideal pops up, and now you're romanticizing their life now that you've like hunted them for decades. So it's one of these like, oh, now that it's changing, we can comment on this and sort of transform it in a different way.
Sort of like the Little House on the Prairie approach to the pioneer days of now that we're not actually starving to death and having our crops fail, we can write about it in it was a better time. Was it? And actually, your point about mechanization and industrialization and stuff is really interesting. And I read back in, I want to say February, maybe, what was it called? American Cuisine and How It Got This Way by Paul Friedman, which is a modern book about the history of American food, going from like the colonial period to the present. So obviously it spans this period and a whole bunch of other stuff, but something that really struck me in that book, and then again in some of the entries in this one, is how we have, not all people in North America now, obviously, but there's a bit of a privilege in looking back at, oh, we baked our own bread as a positive thing, and thinking about how, yeah, it's really nice to bake your own bread. Home-baked bread is delicious. It's great. But when you're feeding 10 people and you don't have a KitchenAid stand mixer and you don't have an electric oven even necessarily, and you're producing 20, 30 loaves of bread a week, holy crap, of course Wonder Bread is amazing.
Right.
Of course this is the best possible thing.
Yeah.
So I don't have like a point here or like a thesis on this. It's just something that always really strikes me when I read about food from this era is the split between like, wow, yes, fantastic, locally grown organic vegetables for everybody. Amazing. But also we've come like full circle. We've come far enough from having to do the labor that choosing to do the labor is a positive thing.
Right. Boomerang, right? So
exactly.
In another video, but it's exactly that. It's a privilege. So what used to be necessary for self-sufficiency, now it's a choice that you can make if you don't have to scramble for subsistence wages, right? Because you have time to bake the bread or do the garden or whatever. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then
there was
you get
one of
like
the
moral decision making when it comes to food and like tastes. That's really interesting.
It is. But there was this one one of the entries was about cooking for like the haymakers, you know, when you'd have all the people come to your farm.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And actually, I'm going to pull up the quote because it was so interesting and it made me really think is, you know, mother liked to have the men eat lots because then she knew they liked her cooking. And it's this whole thing of like, from the perspective of like a 10 or 12-year-old girl that like how exciting this was. And it was so much work, but it was so much fun too.
Yeah.
And it was an interesting experience to read about because on one hand, I'm reading it thinking, yeah, I love it when my mom and I cook Thanksgiving dinner for 30 people. It's so much fun. It's like, you know, we get to do stuff together and it's really satisfying to make this huge meal for all these people. But also just looking at that from an adult and thinking, yeah, we do that with a fridge and an electric oven and, you know, mixers, food processors, whatever we need, versus still feeling that pride, but thinking about how much work would have gone into that pride and like, damn, you are making so much food. And that's really impressive.
Yeah. One of the things I highlighted from that one was the, no, not the smelt fry. Where is it?
Oh, the one out on the West Coast where they've got like the 10-foot skillet?
Oh, no, not the novelty item. So let's see. It's the same one. It's the Midwest threshing was one of my favorites because of the writing style. The mother always sent the little girl to the cave for a pat of butter while the men were washing, for it would have been disgraceful to serve soft butter to the first table. One couldn't help it if the butter turned to oil in a little while. So she goes into the cave. And I'm wondering, like, what's the cave? Like, that's my answer to my, like, historical fiction research question is I need a cave in the middle of New York City. That won't work. But, yeah. I hardly remember Little House on the Prairie, so I don't know if they had a representation of that, but, like, a cold room somehow or, like, a cellar or a – yeah. I like the details about that. And the interesting thing that I liked about that one, the writing style, mother did this, the little girl felt this, it was so this. And it's kind of this weird, the author's obviously writing about herself in the past and her memories, but in a sort of unique, nostalgic way. And I was like, oh, that's nice. Something new.
Yeah, it really struck me in a lot of ways. And it felt the most like written for the sake of writing well, in addition to just communicating information.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Some of these were like, this information is fascinating, but the writing is whatever. But that one was really interesting.
Let me read you one of the opposite ones. Okay. In the past, many a crop failure has been traced to the use of a compost of the manure of animals fed on sorghum and alfalfa and molasses. The substitution of the cheaper sawdust and shavings in the place of a wheat straw bedding reduces the value of the manure and requires more time and labor in the composting. I was like, are we seriously reading about manure composition science here? I
think part of the reason that I enjoyed this so much more is that my brain just clearly skimmed over entire entries.
Yeah, what did I sent you on Twitter that one that was about it's like blood or I don't remember, but you were like, obviously I didn't see that part.
Yeah.
A recipe.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, slang. It was the automat slang.
Oh yeah, the automat slang.
Crazy.
I totally just skipped that page. I'm bad at reading lists.
Yeah, I usually skip over graphics, so I mean that's.
Oh, I love the graphics.
We fit together real well.
Yeah. The automat in general, though, was a fascinating concept and one of those things that I've heard about. And for those of you who have not and are possibly also about to be amazed, basically it was this concept of like an entire diner, but it's a vending machine. So you just go up to a wall and put in like a certain number of, I think it was nickels.
Nickels.
And it'd be like 1 nickel for a coffee or something, and 5 nickels for a bowl of soup or whatever. And you just like get your hot food out and put it on a tray and go sit at a table. And from what I understand, they seem to be basically a New York thing and were really popular with like the lunch crowd and stuff. And I'm just like, yes, I would have been there all the time. That sounds like the coolest restaurant, and I almost don't even care if it's a super hipster version. I need someone to recreate one so I can go and like try this out.
The way you say however many nickels you use makes me feel more like it's an arcade. Like you put like, this one costs 3 nickels to ride or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're saying you think anything with feet, manure, or blood would stick out. Yeah.
You would think.
I had crazy slang. I don't think I put a marker on it, but it should stand out.
I've got our Twitter conversation open here. I can.
Okay. Do you want a fry of mind? Do you want to dress one pig? Do you want a CO highball, which is castor oil? Like,
who's getting castor oil at the dine? Like, what?
Yeah, they have all these like. It's kind of like when you picture a guy with a cigar going, "Meh," say, like that's the noise that I'm hearing all of these orders. So yeah, I went over them. You're funny. Okay, what was, since we both like the Thresher one, what was another one of your favorites? Because I had two other ones. Yeah.
Okay, this one is my favorite because it's maybe unintentionally hilarious. I don't know if this one was writing to be humorous or not, but the one towards the end about mashed potatoes.
Oh, yeah.
There's this woman who just goes on a many-page diatribe about how restaurants systematically fail to serve good mashed potatoes, and she is so angry about the quality of restaurant mashed potatoes and how like you have to do it in a very specific way. And it was just, I don't have any highlights from that section, unfortunately, but I think I read most of it out loud because I was just, this is laugh out loud hilarious to see how this woman is so angry about bad mashed potatoes, which it makes me wonder, like, restaurant mashed potatoes must have gotten better because I like a potato.
It depends.
I like a good mashed potato. I can't think of many instances where I've been served one that would make me go, this is an insult to the noble potato.
Yeah. She talks a lot disparagingly of whipped potatoes and the fact that it's basically like, reconstituted. That's what we have now, I think, out of a box. But I remember when I was just flipping through it, I tagged that one where at the end of the paragraph was something, against all this, like, what chance has the potato? It's just like this ode. Like, it's funny. It's funny. Yeah, we have purists in my family. I'm not a huge fan of the mashed potato, but my sister does like mash actual potatoes for Thanksgiving when she comes, and that's like her dish that she does, and it's very good. But I'm like, it's good. It's not one of my favorite things that I could consume till I'm sick. Like,
for me, it's one of those things where like sometimes I'm just really in the mood for like buttery mashed potatoes. And it's not something where, like, any day of the week I'd sit down and be like, yes, give me a liter of this.
Yeah.
But sometimes I'm just like, you know what I want for lunch today? Mashed potatoes. So I, boil a couple potatoes, mash them up with some butter, and they're a good meal.
Have some on the stove right now?
I do, actually. Would you like to break a quick intermission to my kitchen while we make sure the potatoes aren't boiling over?
Yeah.
Let's see.
Boil them, mash them, stick them in a stew. You know what they make me think of?
Yep. They are not boiling over. They're not even really at a boil yet. So they've now been on for 50 minutes. And
oh, well.
What were some of your other favorite ones other than the Threshers?
Okay, so the next one I had was the New York Literary Tea, which I found hilarious. It was toward the front, and I'm pretty sure that I read that before and, had like written it in a blog. This is like 8-10 years ago, and I had a blog that I kept up. But the New York Literary Tea, this is in a similar like tongue-in-cheek sort of vibe because they're talking about how it's not really about the tea. It's not really about the literature. It's all about being a snob and seeing who's who and like preventing the new writer from getting any clout and like making them feel they know their place. And I was like, oh, yep. It's like same as today.
Basically my worst nightmare.
Yeah, not fun. But Jerry Felsheim, and I wish I knew more of the authors that have written these pieces. Let's see. Oh, and you know what? It also made me think of Jane Austen. The locales of these parties vary from private apartment to special room at the smart nightclubs and hotels. One condition is paramount, however. The place must always be jammed. So I think I'm like, oh, it was a crush, you know? Like,
Yeah.
so, yeah, it's just funny. It's like people being fake in New York City and all those like stereotypes.
It felt like, the Anne Elliot view of Bath in Persuasion.
Yeah.
Of the, like, all of these people just here to be seen with the right people, need to talk to the right one.
Right.
None of us actually like each other or enjoy being here, but it's the thing to do, so here we are.
New York literary tea, pump room. I like it. I like that a lot. Let's see. Okay, so the other favorite I had, the last one I noted, was the California health food at the end. Did you get that one? Like where they're describing like what was health food and like all that.
So much changes and so little does, right? Like,
I mean, why? Why does California like eternally feel like a health food mecca or like a healthy place to be? I mean, go ahead.
I was surprised to hear that that was the case so early, honestly. Because I guess in my head, I'd always sort of assumed that maybe it was linked to like Hollywood and the entertainment industry. Oh. And maybe it's, you've got all these stars who are like desperate to stay beautiful and thin and like saleable. So you get this culture of I'm only eating grapefruits this month or nothing but cabbage soup. I've never actually been to California. But so I was surprised to hear that like that was already an established stereotype by the 1930s.
Well, I think it started because it was drier. So when you come out to the West, it's drier. So if anyone who has like lung complaints or anything like the mucous membrane, it's better if you're in a drier climate. So it's kind of like if you were in Britain and where would they send you to? Like a coastal resort. It was right. So I don't know what the deal was, what the doctors were doing, but I think around 1850 to 1950, probably it was like that was the first health escape reason. But the diet, like, it's crazy. Okay, so 372. Let me pick out ridiculous stuff. Okay, so you've got a sales guy trying to sell a juicer. That's also the same. There will be a bowl of raw sugar, which looks like brown sugar caught in the damp. The 2 shakers will contain 1, alfalfa dust, and 2, sodium glutarate, which gives color to your food. Popular dish is a vegetable salad sprayed with a dressing of mixed lemon juice and honey. Wheat. Oh gosh, you will drink a soy concoction, which looks like boiled down roily water off a red clay-bottomed brook, and tastes just like plain mud. So like, I didn't know people had soybeans that early. Like that's pretty true to life. Like, so
that sounds like all of the worst stereotypes that people have about California now, down to the alfalfa dust and like.
I'd never heard of alfalfa dust. I mean, I've breathed in plenty of it being at a stable, but I'd never heard of like consuming it in any fashion. So. Yeah,
maybe it's wheatgrass now, or maybe wheatgrass was 10 or 15 years ago now, I guess, but.
Yeah, what would it be now? Like matcha powder? Probably matcha powder. But I mean, with all these negative stereotypes, I have to weigh in with a counterpoint, which is that being in here in California for the summer, I went out and found the first plum today of the season, had fallen from the tree, and I was like, oh, I did a little like Instagram reel of it.
Did I see on your... Was it your Instagram that I saw recently? Someone had like apples already or something?
Yeah, I'm very surprised.
And I'm just like, what?
It must be the strain, the species, because these are, I call them tubular apples. I sent them to my friend Allison in Portland. I'm like, these apples are tubular, and she was like, what do you mean tubular? And I showed they look very weird, but my mom informed me they're called columnar apples. They must be like an early yield variety. But yeah, they come out like this. So maybe it takes less time to ripen. I don't know. But yeah, they started falling. They started falling, and I was drying them on the dehydrator because I have found 4 dehydrators in my excavation of the basement so far.
Hopefully my grandparents won't see this. This sounds like the future of my grandparents' house.
Yes.
My grandfather is manic about dehydrating apples.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean,
bushels of them every year.
I mean, it's kind of part of the what we were talking about in terms of privilege and self-sufficiency, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I grew up with a mom who was a hippie and who wanted to do all of like the do your own food, make your own jam and everything. And so we've got all these like legacy as well as a few new fruit trees in the backyard. So
Nice.
apples, peaches, apricots, cherries, although the cherry is very, very fuss budgety, I would say. We got 4 cherries this year, and 2 of them the birds got. So, but yeah, along with my, prepare for the apocalypse type inclination, I feel like I should know how to process food and whatever because,
No, for sure.
useful.
For sure. My mom went through a midlife crisis when I was in my teens and got obsessed with canning for like one summer. And we made so many canned pickled beets.
Oh.
And like only my dad likes pickled beets, so we had pickled beets for years. And like so many canned peaches, which my siblings and I would fight over. And if any of us opened a can, my mom had to be like, right, you can all open a jar of canned peaches because we were all like, Malcolm's eating more than his share.
That's fun. That's fun. It is a lot of work. I mean,
it's so much work.
Yeah. Yeah.
I should look into canning. I've held off because I haven't had storage space, but I now have storage space, so I could theoretically can things.
There you go. I've got several extra things that I could send you. Yeah. I did it. I was going to farm market a lot. I have I get a whole bunch of tomatoes. My Wi-Fi is freaking out. Okay. And I would get a whole bunch of things at a cheaper rate and then, preserve them. But it's one of those like, okay, I'm canning it and I'm waiting for it to pop and I'm going to make sure I don't get whatever that, not salmonella, whatever.
Botulism?
Botulism. Yeah. It's like, you don't want to make a mistake. So there's some.
That's the point that like makes me wary of it is like, I'm really interested in a lot of this DIY preservation stuff. But there's also that sort of feeling that, like, if I do this wrong, I hate throwing out food. Like, I always feel so guilty if something goes bad before I can use it. So it's that weird sort of thing of, like, I'm going to feel so terrible if this fails and I've just thrown away, like, huge amounts of... But you can't make yourself sick, so...
Yeah. That is hard when there's little room for error, but, plenty of reading to be done. I think this is Joe contributing his alfalfa dust.
But see, people actually want everything bagel seasoning.
Yes. I'm not a fan. I like the 21 seasoning salute instead. Thank you very much. But, neither here nor there. All right. What about obsolescence? Okay, so when we look back at history writers in the 1930s, you said they're often writing about 50 years before then. And this made me think of, they wrote the guidebooks, which were really useful, big hit, but are completely not useful now and obsolete. So the food is like a more enduring product because they're writing about something that we can go back to and experiment with. But that was more valuable to them in the time was the guidebooks. So I'm kind of like just thinking about this like obsolescence.
Like the long-term value of what we record for use now versus what will actually be interesting in 100 years. Yeah.
I mean, I often wonder how we're going to read the things that we're writing now that are so interesting and powerful because I'm like, we go through so many formats in a few decades. Like, what are we going to be reading anything on in the future? So there's that. But aside from the like logistics, thinking about what's important and how we'll communicate that knowledge. We think of other cultures that have oral histories handed down, and I'm like, I mean, there's very minimal oral history that's being handed down in my family. So I don't know what your thoughts are on what will last of the writing or the food writing or the travel writing, these sort of things that are foofy and considered non-essential, but we find them interesting.
I think Kurlansky makes a good point at the start of the book and really frames why this is still valuable and interesting now, which is that there is so much writing about food, but there is so little writing about what people actually are eating. And most food writing is about food that most people never actually eat.
That's true. Yeah, the restaurant critics.
So, will anyone care about restaurant critics or books about fine dining in 100 years? I'm sure some people will, if you're into that like history of the genre type thing. But really, at least from my perspective, what's way more interesting is what were people actually doing? I don't care what 50 people in New York ate.
Right.
I care about what 5 million people were eating in one part of the country.
Yeah.
So maybe the recipe blog will actually finally come into its own as a work of writing and people will actually read all the preamble before them. But as you said, will we even have the format to read those? Who knows?
Yeah. What did I was talking to a friend the other day who said he started his own file of recipes that he has tried and liked because he doesn't like going to the blog and having all the preamble and all the explanation and all like the daily life that leads into it. That's the writing part. And I was like, you're killing me here, Charlie.
I mean, I want to do a really similar thing. It sounds so 30 years ago, but one of the things I want to do this coming winter, because you're going to always have time in the coming winter, right? Is get a binder and actually print out the recipes that I really like and that I go back to from websites. Because already there's a recipe that my mom and I used to make so much, like maybe 10 years ago, that we don't have anymore because the website was taken down and it doesn't exist anymore. And it was a great recipe, but...
Right. Have you ever been to the point where you followed a blog for 10 years and then that person closed the blog down but is still on Twitter and they write, and so you message them on Twitter to ask for a certain recipe that you used to use? Because I don't know who else has done that.
I haven't got to that point, but I totally see getting there because there's stuff where it's like I've gone hunting through old Facebook posts trying to find the link to a now defunct blog.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, blogs. Scrolling down to the recipe. It's okay, Joe. It's okay. Everyone does it, apparently. We're just, it's just writers in different disciplines, I guess, just can't get no respect. I'm thinking of, let's see, when you were saying we're not interested in like the restaurant critics thing, I'm thinking of those like dining guides where you would see like little paragraphs about each restaurant. And like, have you ever tried to sell one of those to a used bookstore? Like, nobody wants those.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And you're saying that as a historical fiction writer, so you know nobody wants those.
Right. That's a good point. Like, where do I find resources for how people used to eat? Well, depending on when you're writing about, you could go to like Bogman found in Iron Age. What was in his stomach? That'd be fun. Okay. That's weird. That never happens on a call. Sorry. I'll turn my phone off. That's my computer, actually. So, yeah. Okay. All right. So, obsolescence. What about, okay, the health of food. So, we did the ridiculous California health angle. Another question I had about that was food, how it is cooked, and okay, sorry, 3 points. The food itself, how it is cooked, and how it is eaten. What is the most important part of that process to determine the health of the food? It's sort of a weird question.
I would personally argue how it's cooked. I think that's the point that, like, yes, there's certain advantages to different types of base ingredient. Yes, I'm sure certain varietals of carrot are better for you than others, but I think that crucial step, unless you're adding like, a kilogram of mayonnaise at the table, how you eat it, I don't think is going to have that much of an impact.
Okay. So
but I don't know. What's your thought?
Playing devil's advocate, if you eat one type of food like 3 times a day, 5 times a day without stopping, like mindless eating, that's not healthy in my opinion.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah. But that's one of the questions I wrote down a few days ago, and I've already like forgotten what it was anchored in. So I'm kind of trying to think, like, I don't remember what prompted this question, but obviously if it quotes. So
I do think it's interesting on that note how much we've seen, even in this time period, the priorities of what we need from our food change. Like, this book was written at the very end of people needed calories. If you're doing hard physical labor all day, you just need the calories. Yes, of course you bake a pie every day because people need, they need that source of food. And I think it really shows why we're still having so many issues with finding a balance of food that works for people in modern society, because most people not doing anything active most of the time is such a new concept.
Right.
There was a chapter about, maybe it was in one of the essays, about food at lumber camps. And it reminded me, my great-grandfather worked in lumber camps on the east coast of Canada. And, what my grandfather's always said is they picked where they worked based on the cook. Because when you need to eat 8,000 calories a day,
right, it's crazy.
The food had better be good.
Yeah, what were they talking about? The chuck wagon, how it had a door that came down and the cook was head.
Well, that was on the cowboy equivalent, basically, I think.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
very few people now need to be concerned with, in North America, people do still struggle with food insecurity, but I think a lot more of the food insecurity we face now is access to the food that's actually what we need, right?
Right. Instead of what's marketed to us.
What's marketed at us or what's available in our areas.
Yeah.
But at that point in time, just getting people enough food to keep doing what they were doing was still a important consideration.
Right. Quantity. Just basic quantity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Quantity to produce the food and quantity to be able to eat the food.
Right. He was on a raw diet for 7 months, and especially with vegetables, how important it is to preserve the nutrients. Because if you cook them raw and you're eating nothing really, that's good to know. And in some cases, bringing out the bad in them, the high sugars and such. Oh, that's probably what we did with our carrots, because carrots are sweet. Yeah. Yeah. So I think the reason I put that question down was because of the chapter that talked about vitamins. They were the new thing. First there was calories, now we have vitamins. And what are we going to be doing next? And it's funny that there's this hand wringing when you're like, oh, buddy, buckle in. You're going to be all the food fads. Yeah. What always surprises me when I do research for peasant food for the beaten menus for poor people in 1850. So you have to go into her explaining how you get all the meat off the calf or whatever it is, and I'm a little squeamish about that. So what I look into, at least now, I've read Maud Pember Reeves around about a pound a week, and so she's doing surveys among the poor at around 1910, and so the other end of the century, she's doing surveys for the government about what they spend their money on in the household, who makes the decisions, what they're eating, all these sorts of things, and the amount of bread and margarine you would live on, and it would be what was it, a loaf of bread per person, or 5 pounds of potatoes per person, depending on where you were and what your main diet item was. And that's exactly what we're talking about. Just quantity. Like you're just trying to get as many calories as you can to like keep
the potato chips and French fries of the period, right? It's what was available and cheap.
Right.
And that you could keep people moving.
If you only have one thing, you have to eat a lot of it. Because I'm thinking, I went to the store last Saturday. I got a round of sourdough. This is a big round of sourdough bread, and I'm eating the last piece of that sourdough tomorrow. So, which means like me, I'm on one slice of bread a day because I also have pasta, and I also have pizza, and I also have like corn, and I also have other based products that I can go to, and it's just like so. The reasoning is if you only had that one thing, you had to have a lot of it. And so that's what rickets and like all those diseases come from that. And so I'm, sorry for my characters. Okay, so that's health. Did you have any other broader questions? Because I think
So how did you find Kurlansky's handling of the racism in the entries from the 1930s? Now, I'll explain a bit, because on one hand, I'm really glad that he didn't just, cut out any entries that were incredibly racist. I think that would have been painting an inaccurate image of the time. And I think that really would have made it seem a lot more, gee shucks, back in the good old days when everything was great and it was all sunshine and baseball games and picnics in the park. And I'm glad that he didn't just go with the look at all these happy white people side of it. But I felt like a lot of the times that's one of the areas where a little more introduction and like commentary from him as the modern presenter of this material could have been really valuable.
Totally agree. So the one that I flagged was the fish fry on the levee in Mississippi.
Oh yeah.
So he has very little. I mean, you don't often. Well, I guess you do see the author's name on some of these, but it's like less than a very small paragraph that he does the introduction, and it's not anything about racism. It's just, this is what this person was from, where they were from. This is what they went on to publish, and that's basically it. And so, there's very little. This is the opening line. There are marble palaces up above, they say, for the good Negro who dies, but in Mississippi, such birthrights could be bought at a premium with a good fish fry and nothing sought in exchange. And he goes on to talk about like the best cooks or whatever. And I'm kind of like, I can't.
And there's a lot of stuff where, frankly, even just letting the modern reader know, was the author of this white or black, would really change the perception a bit. Because is this someone documenting their own community in the context of their time and influenced, of course, by the fact that they live in an incredibly racist society, but like at least observing their peers and documenting for themselves? Or is this, the prim white dude in the suit going, like, right? It really changes how you would read it, I think, and not having that information felt very strange at times.
Yeah. I mean, he does have something in one of the explanations that explains different regions would identify them differently, and some included whether the writer was white or black.
True.
Right. But
so sometimes I'm sure it's just that he didn't know.
Right.
But that's that sort of context and that sort of nuanced discussion about the setting and the time and the tone in which this was written, I think would have been really helpful.
Yeah. Hush puppies. Singing has no part in the Levy Negro's festivities, his famed river chants being too closely tied up with his daily labor. Like the stuff in this Mississippi section, it definitely feels like it's a white voice.
It definitely does.
Like cataloging a sort of anthropological, this is the black man in his natural habitat kind of voice. And so that's my feeling on it. But what it's getting mixed up with in my head was that we were talking about how to convey at the writers' conference. We were talking about how, as a writer, you convey unlikable characters or characters that have racist, misogynist, whatever, homophobic tendencies because their whole time does. Like, how do you convey that without making it sound like the authorial voice or and a lot of the authors on the panel said, well, you make them an outsider in some way. Either they've traveled there or they're young or they're outside the family or whatever. And so obviously in this nonfiction environment, they're from there, but you're not evaluating the validity of the text, I guess, or like the reliableness of the narrator. You're kind of, I don't know.
Yeah.
If you can sense the racism in the text because of the way they're talking about a portion of the population, and you know in the back of your head that the context is that this was Jim Crow era, there was a lot of segregation, there was a lot of oppression. Like, yeah, I mean, author note at the minimum, but also why do you choose those pieces to go in? Like, I don't know.
It is, and there were some that like I felt went, maybe this didn't need to be here.
Yeah.
There was the one about the guy who traveled to like, I don't know, somewhere coastal in the South and he went to the oyster bake and it was just so like Gone with the Wind level. As a show you like, I don't even want to.
Yeah, the dialect.
It was just that one. I was like, what does this bring? We've talked about oyster bakes. We've read about these.
Oysters. Too many oysters.
Yeah. What does this explicit one add to the collection?
Yeah.
Whereas others, the one, well, even that Mississippi fish fry one, like there was racism in the tone, but it was about a part of culture that we would not have otherwise seen. And I'm glad that those traditions and that those communal events are remembered, even if reading them now we can be like, yes, but I'm reading this through a heavy filter. Otherwise, I wouldn't know it existed at all. Versus the ones where it just felt like this is just gratuitously uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm trying to like find where I turned the eggnog. The eggnog.
Oh, that one was bad too.
Yeah, the eggnog one is where they were talking about. I'd never heard of cherry bounce. Have you ever heard of that before?
No.
So they're highlighting the fact that it was a drink that grew up after African servants, I guess, because I think it was after Civil War, but people who were basically connected to the plantation postbellum, that's not the word, I don't remember. Anyway, it was talking about how after big celebrations at the plantation house, they would take the drinks that were left over and put them in or whatever, kind of like how we do for a fruitcake, like a liquored up fruitcake for holiday. And I'd never heard of cherry bounce or that where that tradition started. But yeah, they had like the slaves or enslaved people or servants in whatever period would have their cherry bounce, and the fine people at the plantation would have their eggnog. But it was a black person who knew how to make it and was the only person who knew how to make it. And
yeah,
you not see the like dependence and the weird relationships as you're writing this person in the 1930s, like,
right?
Yeah,
like I have to say, one of the sections that, while it was by no means perfect or free from racism, that really did impress me was the section, is the big chapter about the Midwest, And it starts with pre-colonial food of the indigenous people. And that's something that, frankly, we barely hear about now. In part, of course, because we've had another 80 years of cultural genocide, cutting off all ties to that time and those traditions. But I was surprised that it was there at all, and the detail that it was done in, and like by no means respectful language necessarily, but like compared to how badly it could have been done, I was pleasantly surprised.
Was like, this is how they would make it, and this is how they would mash it, and this is how they would do this, because that got really boring. Yeah, I think, okay, as I said at the beginning, it started out more commentary, more funny, more like snappy, and then sort of petered out to more informative, less commentary recipes, and then a whole lot of resource information at the end when we got to the West and Southwest, which is a little disappointing because that's my area. But I feel like that's also kind of how Mark Kurlansky approached the project. Like, these people, and there were rumors about this guy, and then it was sort of like, oh, and there are also all these interesting other pieces that I don't want to look up. Here you go. So, yeah, that was the petering out for me.
Yeah, I think that's the downside to taking something like this on, too, I think, is it's not like he can go back and say, hey, guys, make sure you get lots about this. People are going to be interested about this in 100 years. Right?
Right.
I wonder if it was partly that, like, the stuff from the eastern side of the country was just more ready and more pulled together, and he had more to work with.
Right, right. Okay, so to compare with this, so this is food-based, but I was doing research for the 1893 World's Fair and how the women put together the exhibits for the women's building, sorry, because part of the new book takes place there. And someone did a whole lot of research to be able to say all the little shenanigans that went on, everyone who pissed everyone else off, all the correspondence, like all the tea. So that was fascinating. I was reading about, who wrote to whom, who the faction was that did not want African Americans represented, who wanted women's achievements in all the men's buildings in those subject areas, like when they cut off someone because she was creating too much press about this scandal. Like, there was all this interesting information, but part of it was how they gathered it from all the states. New York had its act together. Like,
The
state wrote, do with it what you will. And so you got a sense of like who was performing and underperforming and creating problems. But here, I think I liked how he had the state in charge of organizing all the rest of the states for the region, because then you got a sense of like who was the mover in the region and then why they were overrepresented. And so
then some commentary about like they were only overrepresented because this group had already been disbanded, so it really should have gone here, but they weren't there anymore, so go for it, Montana, or wherever it was.
Yeah. Montana was the one that had the dulse, which really surprised me. I was like, seaweed, Montana.
Right? I did not expect that.
And grunions I had to look up. That is still a thing, apparently.
Okay.
The grunions come up on the shore in California, and there's like a day or two where people go out after them, and there's rules about how many you can catch. But I didn't believe. I mean, the names for fish are so unbelievable. I had to look it up to make sure it was a real thing.
Grunions really sounds like some new weird spin-off of Funyuns.
Which are also good. I mean, maybe Funyuns was made about grunions, because grunions are like fried, crisp little fish.
True.
Yeah, that's funny. Oh gosh. Okay. Wow. Okay. The last 15 minutes cruised on right by. I think we answered all my questions. I got to point out my manure composition science, so that was very important. And the foot washing and the bread batter, or whatever that was. Was there anything else that stood out to you that you wanted to highlight? Your reading experience of this book.
This book, I think my final thought is it's really hard for me to tell if this is overall an interesting book or not. Because I found it so cool. But also I'm like, I know that I have weird tastes in this sort of stuff sometimes and find a lot of stuff cool that most people will be like, why?
Yeah.
Part of me wonders if this would have been better off as like a 10 article series. Like pick the best 10 and represent them that way.
Visit that place and see if people still have memories of those things. Sorry, I'm in the light.
Yeah, like put really more research into the best written ones.
Yeah.
Or the most interesting ones too, right? Like, 'cause if something wasn't well written but was a really interesting topic, there's a lot that could have been done to build around it to be like, this is cool, here's why, here's the history, here's the present, here's what was being written then, let's discuss. But as it was very much just like, okay, all this stuff fell on the floor, I picked it all up, and here you go, here's a book.
Yeah. I think it's a departure from his other books. Where he's
definitely. So. I've read a lot of his other books, and they tend to be, if I remember correctly, pretty well researched and pretty tight.
Yeah.
I wonder if that's part of it. He usually writes, like, he's the perfect example of a microhistory writer, and I can see how taking on something like this would be a very, very different approach where you're trying to get a high-level look at a lot of different stuff, as opposed to being able to really deep dive into one subject. Although
his deep dives also took him, like, throughout many disciplines. So
true.
Yeah.
True. But, like, he had that guiding topic. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
Yes, it's not a deep dive into the salt of a certain town in coastal France, but you're really focused on getting to know a lot about one topic as opposed to having to, today I'm researching about chitterlings and tomorrow it's grunions and...
Right. Yeah, the chitterling circuit.
I have to say, have you ever had chitterlings? I've never seen them served in Canada, but...
I don't. Right? I think that's.
Sorry, you cut out for a sec there.
Oh, I think it has to do with the intestine, right?
Yeah, I had to actually Google to make sure, but
I think it's a cow.
Yeah, I think so. Maybe a pig.
I've had sweetbreads. I've had sweetbreads at a fancy restaurant, and they were good. But I haven't had chitterlings, which I think is just the same thing prepared a different way, which is like fried instead.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I had a very bad, well, not very bad. I made the mistake, and I've said this in a few other live shows, it's a weirdly specific detail to share, but I made the mistake of eating offal for the first time for breakfast while jet lagged.
Yes, I heard this.
I'm in Hong Kong. Congee with offal is apparently a breakfast that people eat. I'll eat that here.
Yeah.
And like, ouch. I need to like redeem them in my head because I like the concept. I love the eat the whole animalness of it.
Right.
But
yeah,
it's not a great first experience.
Yeah, that taste memory, that sensory memory. It's like
hard. It was the texture for me. It was this is chewy. Why is this chewy?
What did I started following? Was it Black Country? They're sort of like Yorkshire museum folk that dress up and take you through like a living history museum on Instagram. And it's awesome. But they had one recent one where she was making up her husband's dinner pail and it was all like tripe. I was like watching her, overhead thing of like the counter and chopping up the tripe. And I was like, haven't tried that. Not sure I'm gonna. Because that's the texture too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Ideals, reality. Yeah. I'm there too. So.
I might need to start with like the menudo, or however you pronounce that Mexican soup that one of the chapters talks about.
That's tripe soup.
Yeah, exactly. If Mexican food can't make it good, I don't know what can.
Yeah, make sure you get plenty of tripe in there. None of that like broth with a couple leaves
Yeah.
floating around as someone said, I've been gypped. Yeah, I still haven't found a replacement word for that. What am I supposed to say instead?
That's a good question. Language is difficult.
I've been robbed. There we go. Yeah. Well, here we are. I'm ready to pass on my copy of Fruit of a Younger Land, which I've had so long that the spine bleached. I could take
To a
out all
much
my
more attractive color, let's be real.
This?
The spine of yours, it's bleached to a much less jarring color, at least.
Oh, I like orange. I like the bright orange. So Sandy wants to try the menudo. Oh my goodness. So where is the light coming from? Where is it coming from? There we go. Yeah, I met a roommate. I had a roommate in college who had relatives who made menudo, and she'd tease me and like, nope, never felt compelled. Yeah. But you go ahead and tell us how it is, Sandy. Oh. We did this during June and sort of into July, and I can finally pass it on as part of my ancient TBR project. So thank you, Rosie. And I'll just pop up your channel info again, because it's in the chat. I can do this. Where is it in the chat? Doo-doo-doo. You're one of the only people I know who actually has the shortcut come up when I come to your channel. You took your headphones out, so now I can't hear you. Turn off the Bluetooth. All right, well, I can't hear you anymore. Oh, well, okay. Thank you, Rosie. This was awesome. This is great to like spin out these issues and reading feels with this book, and we'll find a better one next time. Thank you so much for joining me here today, and thanks everyone for visiting. We'll see you next time. Bye.